The diner smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fried bacon, the kind of scent that clung to old booths and cheap uniforms. Sarah had been working there since she was 16, and now, at 23, it felt less like a job and more like a survival mission. Every day she balanced trays, smiled at strangers, and tucked away her exhaustion behind a tired but polite grin. Rent was always late, bills piled up on her counter, and her mother's hospital treatments drained every penny she managed to scrape together. Still, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity, determined not to let the world see how close she was to breaking. That Tuesday afternoon was like any other. The lunch rush had slowed, and she was wiping down tables when the door creaked open. A man stepped in, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that screamed wealth. His shoes gleamed in contrast to the cracked linoleum floor. Sarah noticed him immediately because he looked so out of place. Men like him didn't usually come here. They ate in glittering restaurants where the tablecloths were whiter than snow, not in diners with sticky menace. He sat in the corner booth by the window, removed his sunglasses, and ordered black coffee without looking at the menu. His voice was deep, calm, but carried a weight that Sarah couldn't name. She brought him his coffee, careful not to spill, and for the first time caught sight of something shining around his neck. It was a silver locket, simple but elegant, dangling from a chain just visible beneath his crisp shirt. Sarah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that locket. She had seen it 1,000 times before, in an old photograph her mother kept in a drawer at home. A photograph of her when she was young, holding a man's hand, smiling in a way Sarah had never seen her smile in years. And around her mother's neck in that photo, the very same locket. Her tray shook in her hands. She set the coffee down, trying not to stare, but she couldn't stop her eyes from darting to it again and again. Finally, she whispered almost without thinking, "That's my mom's locket." The man looked up sharply. For the first time since he entered, his eyes, blue, piercing, and weary, locked onto hers. His face went pale, his lips trembled as if he had just been struck by lightning. He reached for the locket instinctively, clutching it in his fist. His voice cracked when he asked, "What did you just say?" "That's my mom's," Sarah repeated, her voice firmer now though her hands were shaking. "Where did you get that?" The man pushed the coffee aside as if it no longer mattered. He leaned forward, his eyes glistening. Seconds later, his composure shattered. His shoulders trembled, and before Sarah could process what was happening, the billionaire in the spotless suit broke down in tears, right there in the diner. His name was Daniel Hayes. The world knew him as the ruthless billionaire who built a tech empire from nothing. Headlines called him the Shark, a man who never hesitated, never showed weakness, never let emotions interfere with business. But Sarah now saw a broken man, his facade crumbling under the weight of something personal, something buried so deep the world had never seen it. Between sobs, he confessed a truth that left Sarah breathless. Years ago, when Daniel was just a boy, his mother had been everything to him. She wore that locket every single day, telling him it was a reminder of her love. But one tragic night, after years of struggling, she vanished. He was taken into foster care, and life forced him onto a path of survival. He hardened his heart, clawed his way into wealth, but all along he carried her locket, the only thing he had left of her. Sarah's heart pounded. This couldn't be real. Was Daniel saying that her mother was his mother too? She rushed to the kitchen, grabbed her phone, and pulled up the photo she always kept, the picture of her mother in her youth. The same face, the same locket. Daniel's hands shook as he held the phone. "That's her," he whispered, his tears streaming freely. "That's my mom, that's our mom." The diner seemed to fade around them, the clinking dishes and chatter disappearing into silence. Sarah and Daniel sat there, two strangers suddenly bound by blood, their lives colliding in the most unlikely place. But reunion was never that simple. Sarah's mother, Grace, had always been quiet about her past. She never spoke about where she came from, about family she left behind, about the struggles she endured before Sarah was born. And now, the truth unfolded years earlier. Life had torn her and young Daniel apart, and she had carried the pain silently, never confessing to Sarah that she had an older brother. Daniel wanted answers. Why had she left him? Why did she never come back? But Sarah defended her mother, explaining the hardship, the nights of hunger, the jobs that barely paid for food. Grace had been a young woman with nothing, and sometimes survival meant impossible choices. The next days were filled with tension, confusion, and fragile hope. Daniel visited Grace in the hospital, where her illness had kept her weak and bedridden. The moment he walked into the room, Grace gasped, her frail hands trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Danny," she whispered, calling him by the name she used when he was little. The decades of distance melted in an instant. He fell to his knees by her bed, clutching her hand, sobbing like the little boy who had lost her so many years ago. It was not an easy road. The pain of abandonment clashed with the joy of reunion. Grace apologized endlessly, her voice weak but sincere. Daniel wrestled with anger, love, and grief all at once. Sarah watched it all unfold, realizing her life had changed forever. She wasn't just the poor waitress struggling to survive. She was the sister of a billionaire. But Daniel, broken by the years of loneliness, didn't come into her life to flaunt his wealth. Instead, he came with something she had never expected: the desire to heal, to build the family they had both lost. He paid for Grace's treatments, moved Sarah and her mother into a better home, and promised never to let them go again. Challenges remained. Trust didn't build overnight. Sarah had to accept that this man, who had grown up in luxury while she scraped for survival, was truly her brother. Daniel had to learn humility, to understand that money didn't erase years of pain. Grace's health was fragile, and time wasn't on their side. But together, they faced it all, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter, always with love. Months later, Sarah quit the diner, not because Daniel gave her money, but because he encouraged her to pursue her dream of becoming a teacher, a dream she had buried under bills and exhaustion. Grace, though weak, lived long enough to see her children united again, her last days filled with peace instead of regret. And Daniel, once the untouchable billionaire, became a man who wasn't ashamed to cry, to love, to be human. This story isn't about wealth. It isn't about chance encounters. It's about the power of family, forgiveness, and the strength to rebuild what was lost. Sometimes the people we need most appear in the most unexpected places, even in a shabby diner on an ordinary afternoon. And to you, dear listener, watching this story unfold, what do you think matters more in life, success or family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Be Kind Always. Together, we can spread more stories that inspire kindness, forgiveness, and hope.